Hey, good morning, Jeremy. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself, Brian? Good morning.
Excellent. I appreciate you taking time with us today. I think what you're going to talk about is fascinating, hopeful, interesting, all those things. You're always that way. So now we're able to put it together and put it out to more people. But let's start with the basics and go in depth as much as you want. Talk about your background a little bit and how that came into what you're doing now.
Sure. So my name's Jeremy Tyler. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. For people who don't live here, in Louisville, Kentucky, for those who do. Grew up here, raised here. That means we have a few industries here. Bourbon, fried chicken, horse racing are the big ones. There's of course some other ones, but nonetheless, those are the ones that Kentucky's known for. And of course, college basketball.
Yeah.
With that said, I did go to University of Louisville. Got a degree in political science and economics. Political science taught me some how to do some research, and economics taught me how to understand how people think from the behavioral economics point of view. It's something I have a deep passion for. After getting out of school, worked a few different jobs, but eventually got on Brown Forman. For those who aren't familiar with Brown Forman, they're the corporation that makes Jack Daniels, Woodford Reserve, El Jimador, etc. for it. Started on there doing kind of like in the consumer insights analyst role for it for globally, where I'd write surveys, look at research in Poland, Russia, South Korea, Canada, and of course the US. After doing that for a couple of years, moved over to Jack Daniel family of brands, where I basically was the insights person for the US and Canada for them. They had just been rolling out the flavors during that time period, and my claim to fame on that was I basically figured out they kind of rolled out the flavors without necessarily a strategy or understanding how consumers are going to react to it. They just knew, hey, honey looks like a good flavor. It's getting big. Let's create one for it. But I figured out where flavor whiskey drinkers were coming from through shopper panel data and where they're going to and what that meant for the brand, which ended up being pretty fascinating. After that success there, Brian Foreman moved me on to basically everything outside of Jack Daniels, their portfolio, which is extensive and large, where I helped understand what's causing the craft whiskey boom that was happening at that time. That was a very big project that impacted pretty much the entire Brown Forman portfolio. Also, understanding how we should structure the shelf and the off premise, as well as developing long term consumer strategies for all the brands. After being at Brown Forman for nearly 12 years, I moved over to KFC because, like I said, we do bourbon and fried chicken here in Kentucky. So I did that for a couple of years where I led their innovation strategy pipeline, their advertising as well as repositioning, which they just came out with a repositioning that looks fantastic, if I do say so myself,
There you go.
and their general consumer strategy and marketing principles for them as well. They're moving to Plano, Texas. I'm not. So I then created my own, which I've been doing it for a couple years anyways, between Brown Forman and KFC, but I created my own consulting and insights business called JT Key. So I do consumer insights, strategy, and innovation work, and I've been working with brands like Heaven Hill, where I'm working across a lot of their portfolio, Four Roses, and then not doing just alcohol. I also do food brands like VV Supremo, which is like a Mexican cheese and chorizo company as well. Working across the industry. Love what I do. Really enjoy it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Before we leave your background and kind of catch up to current events, if you will, tell me about with that background, X amount of years, probably 15, 20 years, I would guess, right?
Yeah, 15 years of insights background.
Reflect back in the next 20 seconds or so and tell me uh, which experience you're most proud of, and tell me about one of your experiences. If you had it to do over again, you would do it differently.
So what's one I'm most proud of for it? There's quite a few, so I'm going to think about that for a second. But I'll just at least throw out one for
Take
you
your
real
time.
quick. Yeah, yeah. We had a thing called a brand health tracker at Brown Forman, where they just kind of ask consumers like, "What brands do you know? Which ones do you drink? Who are you?" type of deal for it. It was mainly used for past understanding of like, oh, where do we think this brand went wrong? But it wasn't used for future understanding. And my big thing that I ended up doing that impacted Brown Forman Company a lot at that point was corporate kind of came out with what are their 2025 plans. Funny enough, this was like in 2018. We're in 2025 now. But they said, well, what does this mean from a consumer point of view? So I looked at what all of their corporate strategy goals were based off of cases, and I used our brand tracker to kind of say, well, is this achievable? And if it is, how much awareness do you need to get for your brand and how many consumers do you need to capture for that? And I kind of came back to them and said, hey, for Old Forester, you want to get this many cases? That means you have to get to this much awareness, which means you need to make 25 million people aware of your brand. Can you do that with your budget? And they would kind of come back and say, there's no way, and it created this whole KPIs that everybody could create of, we need this much awareness, this many consumers. We're going to work with our media agency to say, how much budget do we need, which gave them KPIs to work toward for the first time ever. And it allowed us to create an overall brand strategy that we would use for our strategy and ideation sessions every single year based off of that as well.
It's awesome. Your regrets in that early to mid part of your career? Anything you do differently, not regrets?
Yeah. No, that's fair. You learn a lot over time. I think I was probably more abstract earlier on in my career where I didn't think as much about what's the execution look like? What are your confines about it all? I'd say, well, why can't we just do this? But you understand, you grow to understand like, well, what does this mean in a three-tier system? How does this matter to distributors? How does this matter to retailers? And I always say you need to treat your distributors and retailers to a certain extent also like your consumers, and that what matters to them, because what matters to a consumer is not always what matters to a distributor, and you need to know what your product is doing for each of your customers, not just your customer at the very end.
Great point. That's fantastic. All right, Jeremy, let's get to the topic that everyone seems to be taking sides on and running in fear and disbelieving. But talk to me about the noise around Gen Z, and has their alcohol consumption fallen through the floor as reported? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so that's been a fun one to look at across the board. So I think whenever people talk about Gen Z, in our industry, they talk about the alcohol consumption, when in reality, what they should be talking about is changing behaviors that's affecting the entire, not just our industry, but multiple industries. And it, quite frankly, is the same way that they should have been talking about millennials back in 08, 09, 010, or 2010 about what was going on with them and what was causing the whiskey boom. So to step back a little bit, the number that's been going around is that Gen Z is drinking 87% less alcohol than millennials. It's a terrible number. I'll just say that from the get go. This is coming from the insights point of view. They look at an entire age bracket where most, more than half of them or so isn't even of legal drinking age, and says that they're, not buying as much alcohol as millennials that are all of legal drinking age, and quite frankly, all have significantly more money than they've ever had before. And then comparing it to, I'll give a good example. If I were to look at Gen Z buying houses, buying homes, and millennials, I would say Gen Z is buying 90% less houses than millennials. Gen Z just doesn't want homes anymore. And of course, that's not true. It's just, that's a terrible way to look at an entire bracket for it all. So that stat is absolutely not a good one. Now, with that said, there has been a good amount of research done into this. What we saw is that there was a fall off with Gen Z on consumption. It wasn't an 87% fall off. It was maybe somewhere between 25% to 33% for it all. And that's on both alcohol spend and possibly incidence rate of like the number of people that were drinking. Keep in mind that's been in the last like 4 to 5 years. There's a big thing that happened during that time period, of course, which is COVID. So that could be going into it. But as a more hopeful thing, and we can come back to this later, IWSR, which is a international wine and spirits research company, actually just recently said past 6 months incidence rate among Gen Z is now the same as millennials, where it was 66% previously, like just 2 years ago in 2023, and now it's back up to 70. So I'd be curious what past 3 month or past 30-day incidence rate looks like. It makes me a little red flag about why they use past 6 months, but it's a good sign nonetheless. But there has been a fall off in the past few years for Gen Z just not as catastrophic as everyone else is making it with that 87% number.
Do you, and you're certainly not going to get it from me, but do you get pushback in kind of the way you interpret the information and talk about it in venues like this?
Not particularly. Obviously, those two things that go into it. Obviously, if I'm talking about alcohol brands, they want to be helpful, but that's not the case. So actually, there's less likely to push back on it anyways. I'm actually more likely to get pushback from maybe some other researchers, and that makes sense. We're debating the data. I have a good friend, Daniel Jude, he was at Brown Forman as well. He's got a PhD in criminology, really smart dude, but he was doing digital insights, and on his end, he looks at the what people are saying online and everything else and saying, hey, based on what I'm seeing, Gen Z doesn't think it's as cool as it used to be to drink. Do I think that probably plays a role? Yes. I'm just always a little cautious about just using online because people that talk online isn't everybody. You get a strong bias whenever you look at stuff like that. But it's a good tool, is what I would say. So something for us to consider. It's just not the only thing that I think matters on that.
Yeah, understand. With that, is social occasions and the issues and the softness with our friends in on-premise, is that related to Gen Z? Is that connected somehow? Is it an occasion problem that we're looking at?
It is. So there's been quite a bit of research on this, but I had already been hypothesizing that quite a bit um, earlier. So for a long time, um, people would say like, "Oh, Gen Z is more into sustainability and healthy choices and everything else along those lines." And I think they were looking at a minority of Gen Z whenever they made those statements for it all. I actually, if I created a list, those would be at the bottom reasons for why Gen Z has fallen off on drinking some.
Hmm.
Top three, and I'll start with the number three first, is THC. Hey, look, it's growing. More Gen Z's using that type of stuff for it. So that's going to affect the amount of alcohol. Though THC mixed with alcohol, of course, is growing as well. So if you're in that market, good for you. It's going to be a strong market to get into, though you're going to have to battle some others.
Right.
Number two is the same reason why whiskey's falling off and the same reason that craft breweries are falling off is craft was largely a millennial and Gen X thing that people were into and that entire industry. And that was all about back in the 90s, 2000s, it was all about brand image. So you had your Ciroc and you had your Abercrombie. These are different industries completely doing really well. Grey Goose, they're all shooting up. And then, because it was all about bad status. And then the 07, 08 recession happened, and millennials kind of came in and said, I'm tired of paying expensive money for these machine made stuff. I want a deeper human connection, and that's where the craft beer came in and where whiskey boomed from, and quite frankly where Tito's did so well for it all. It's all about this deeper human. Gen Z's not into it. I want to be honest. So like, there's a lot of money in that market still because of millennials and Gen X, but Gen Z is not nearly as much into that whole human connection. They're actually much more toward the 90s and 2000s. They want it to be more fun, maybe a lot slightly more badge status for it all. It's a reverse, and it's not just affecting alcohol. It's affecting the restaurant industry. You have these places that were like these independent burger places or taco places that Gen Z makes fun of that they call millennial burger place, millennial taco place. Where you have the brick interior and the open air ducts where you can see everything on the chalkboard menu. They make fun of it, and it's because they're not as into it. While brands like Chili's is doing fantastic, they're up 33% this past year. They're targeting Gen Z, and Gen Z is eating them up. But to your original question, the number one reason I think the alcohol's fallen off is because Gen Z is not engaging in the same social occasions that previous generations were. So for the first, and you can see this in a lot of trends, young males have the highest record ever of either saying they have no friends or they only have one friend. The dating environment is completely different. The amount of people that use apps now for dating instead of going to bars to meet people is going to bars to meet people is way down. Using the app is way up. And we can see this effect in the social occasions, with guys. They're just not engaging in those same social occasions nearly as much. And girls still are to a certain extent, which is why for the first time among Gen Z, there are more women drinking alcohol than there are men. But the reason why we're seeing
Interesting.
that fall off is they're not making up that same share of stomach that men were making up previously. maybe they're only having 2 drinks, while men previously would have had 3 to 4 drinks type of deal. So even though there's more women than men now drinking monthly or weekly, they're not making up the same volume that they were previously. And a lot of industries are getting affected by this. It's not just alcohol.
Yeah, that's a tough message. Great insight on your behalf. That's it's understandable. It doesn't make it easy to fix or address. Selfishly, I have a lot of friends and a lot of admiration for the craft beer industry and some of the craft beer players. What would be your 3 minute advertisement to those guys in terms of what they could expect to help out at least some and curtail the declines?
Yeah, it's a tough thing. So if you're in the craft beer industry, you're going to have to make somewhat of a decision and you might be able to dual path it. But either you go after the giant big pie that is millennials and Gen X, that a lot of players are in, but that is slightly shrinking over time, even though it's giant. Or you go after Gen Z that's still smaller and slowly expanding, but you can't do your craft message that you did before. It's got to be something fun for them to get into. And quite frankly affordable as well. Fun and affordable. That's where they're heading. Versus this deep meaning. I want to know who the human is behind this brand type of thing. So, and you can try to dual path it based off of maybe different advertising or different venues, but you need to figure out where you are in that space for it.
I think that's great feedback. Winding down here, give me, if you can, please give me the 3 to 5 minutes on why you and I became interested in partnering together, but also what your message is to everyone outside of this room that we're in. What is it you're doing with your company? What's the benefit? How do people get in touch with you? All that information.
Yeah, glad to do so. So I think that you and I first started talking because I had saw videos from your organization that y'all posted. One was with Ed Crius, who I know from the Brown Forman world originally, and he's now the director of the Serrano. And I said, hey, I reached out and I said, hey, I think it would be great if we could do an interview on Gen Z. There's a lot of conversation around Gen Z. We need to talk about what's actually happening with them versus a bunch of people just kind of sitting down posting their little theories about what's happening with bad numbers, quite frankly, for it all. So with that said, as far as what I do consumer research for companies that either don't have consumer insights or do have it, but they need help with it. That includes surveys, just deep dives into who your consumer is, how many of them are aware of you, what your strategy should be based off of this, what occasions or functions do they focus with you on, what emotional associations do they have, etc. So that way they can understand what's happening in the world and what they should be doing. I also run focus groups whenever we'll get into that deeper meaning or truly trying to understand this. I was in Dallas last week and Chicago the week before doing liqueur research for focus groups, which was a lot of fun. I also do a huge amount of strategy. So based off of the information that we know, what should be your strategy that you should have for your brand? So if your goal is to, grow by 10% over the next 3 years, what does that look like from a consumer point of view of how many consumers you need to capture? And then what are your 8 levers that you're going to pull to get there? Is it going to be awareness, distinctive assets, occasion targeting or emotional targeting? Or is it going to be distribution, shelf strategy, portfolio, so innovation, or price? For it all. What 8 levers are we going to pull for that? And then lastly is that innovation point of view. Whenever I was at example, I've worked in the alcohol space for innovation, but fast food innovates like crazy. So I'll give them an example. I tested out over 500 concepts just in 2024 alone whenever I was at KFC for us to do. So creating some strategy about what your innovation should be and then actually going out there and testing that innovation because that is for a lot of companies, their long-term key to growth
Yeah.
as well. For it
Yeah,
all.
I think that's a great message. Literally, how can people find you? Is your
Yeah.
website the best way to go?
So my organization is called JT Key. You can find me on LinkedIn for that. If you type that in, that's J.T.Key. Like what you open the door with, because we're all about unlocking brand growth using insight strategy and innovation. So please feel free to find me on there. I also have another organization called J&J Insights, where I work with one of my best friends, another Jeremy, funny enough. I call him Neff, where we do a lot of syndicated reports. So we're doing distinctive asset research currently for the entire spirit industry for them to understand, do people recognize your packages and your logos and taglines and everything else for it, which is great research to do. So either one of those on LinkedIn for it, and feel free to reach out to me. Of course, my name is Jim Tal. You'll find me pretty quickly on there as well if you want to shoot me a message in any way.
Outstanding. Thanks, Jeremy. We appreciate the partnership. I always feel, myself and the team always feel enlightened from our conversations, and I really appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you. I really appreciate doing this. I'll do it anytime for you or anyone else for that matter. I love talking about this stuff.
We'll take you up on it, I guarantee you.
Thank you so
All
much.
right. Take care, Jeremy.
You too.
Great job.
That was
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
I know we didn't hit on one of the questions you had was about the like what brands are doing well, but sorry we didn't hit on that. I would have said Buzzball, by the way, if we ever got to that. So if there's ever a follow up question, I'll be sure to answer that.
My daughter loves Buzzball.
I know.
Buzzball's on fire. I never thought I would
Yeah,
see
they're
that.
they're they're doing really well on that. There's quite a few different brands out there that are really been doing well with Gen Z.
Yeah, I think that this tidal wave of, all the cutbacks and supplier and certainly distributor, I think it all comes from just missing Gen Z, missing clues. And they now have cover to cut everybody back that they hired at the end of COVID or during COVID. And it's not a one for one thing, but it is kind of a secret pass that if you're going to cut back 20% of your sales force, do it now because everyone else is doing it, and the reasons are pretty solid as to why they're doing it.
Yeah, no, it's. I think they totally missed. They were so focused. And that was kind of the point I was making on what was driving the whiskey boom and everything else that went along with that whole craft boom that they
Yeah,
didn't take time to consider. Like, well, this can't last forever, and what is really next? And unfortunately, I think a lot of the generation research people were so focused on that minority of people who were like ultra millennial like, where they were super unique and super into like I was caught more like left leaning type of stuff with the human connection that they missed this entire trend that was happening with the rest of Gen Z for it
yeah,
all.
yeah. Seems to have. So, all right, my friend, appreciate your time today.